next section, we're going to look at how the war really came to a close. Or in other words, we're looking really at the Paris Peace Conference. Our learning objectives are to describe the goals of the Paris Peace Conference and explain why the United States never joined the League of Nations. So, as the war drew to a close, the destruction and massive loss of life was shocking. President Wilson wanted a just and lasting peace to ensure that a war like the Great War would never happen again. Wilson outlined his plan for peace in a speech to Congress in January of 1918. His plan for peace was called the 14 Points. Wilson's first 4 points called for open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, the removal of trade barriers, and the reduction of military arms. The 5th point proposed a fair system to resolve disputes over colonies. The next 8 points dealt directly with self-determination, or the right of people to decide their own political status. For example, he wanted the various ethnic groups within Austria-Hungary to be able to form their own governments. The 14th point, which Wilson believed was the most important, called for the formation of a League of Nations, which would be an organization of nations that would settle disputes, protect democracy, and prevent future wars. On January 12, 1919, the leaders from 32 nations representing about 3/4 of the world's population attended the Paris Peace Conference. The leaders of the victorious Allies dominated the negotiations. Those leaders, President Wilson, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, French Premier Georges Clemenceau, and Italian Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando, became known as the Big Four. Germany and other Central Power nations were not invited to participate. Wilson wanted to prevent another such war and build a lasting peace, but the other Allied nations wanted to punish Germany as they blamed Germany for starting the war. The Allies eventually reached an agreement and presented it to Germany in May. The final treaty was harsher than Wilson had wanted. The treaty forced Germany to disarm and to pay the Allies reparations, or payments for damages and expenses that were caused by the war. The amount far exceeded what the German government could afford to pay and placed a tremendous burden on the German people. This peace agreement became known as the Treaty of Versailles. Wilson's idea of a League of Nations was included in the Treaty of Versailles. The U.S. Constitution, though, requires all treaties to be ratified by the Senate. The Senate would not ratify the treaty because of the fear that belonging to the League could draw us into another foreign war. The U.S. never joined the League and entered into separate peace agreements with Austria, Germany, and Hungary. Now let's talk about the impact of the war. The war led to the overthrow of monarchies in Russia, Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire. The war devastated European economies. It led the U.S. to become the world's leading industrial power. Farmers in the U.S. were hit hard after increasing production for European markets during the war, but demand decreased after the war. The war had drawn more than 1 million women into the workforce. Their service led to the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1919, giving women the vote. The war encouraged many African Americans to move to northern cities in search of factory work. This became known as the Great Migration. European nations had lost almost an entire generation of young men. France was in ruins. Great Britain was deeply in debt to the United States, and Germany was devastated by the huge reparation payments that they had to pay. World War I was not a war to end all wars as many had hoped. It left many issues unresolved that would resurface and contribute to the start of World War II.